A 19-year-old black GI was assigned to a British nurse no one trusted. One night changed everything. October 1944. A military hospital near Bristol, England. Corporal James Mitchell stood in the hallway, blood still wet on his uniform from carrying wounded men in from Normandy. He had survived 3 months of combat, walked through the hell of hedgerow fighting, and watched friends die in muddy French fields. What he did not know was that the real battle, the one that would define him, was about to begin right here in this supposed place of healing. Before we go further, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We bring you these untold stories of courage and humanity from World War II every week. Comment below and let us know which country you're watching from. Your support keeps these forgotten stories alive. A British nursing officer approached him, her face tight with something that looked like fear. "You're the one they sent?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. James nodded, still confused about why he'd been pulled from his unit without explanation. She glanced down the corridor, then back at him, her eyes betraying a knowledge he didn't yet possess. "Then God help you both." Before he could ask what she meant, she walked away quickly, her shoes clicking against the tile with urgent rhythm. James felt his stomach tighten. Something was wrong. And in that moment, standing in that hallway with rain pounding overhead and blood drying on his sleeves, he realized he wasn't being given an assignment. He was being given a test designed for him to fail. 3 days earlier, James had been pulled from his unit without explanation. No one would tell him why. This was punishment disguised as assignment, a familiar cruelty dressed in military efficiency. Over 150,000 black soldiers were stationed across England, and British women didn't seem to care about the color line the way American command wanted them to. British pubs served everyone. British families invited black soldiers to Sunday dinners. British women danced with them, laughed with them, and sometimes fell in love with them. The American military establishment found this intolerable. So the Army came up with solutions. Segregated leave schedules meant white and black soldiers would never occupy the same town on the same weekend. Threats of court-martial hung over any soldier caught fraternizing across racial lines. And sometimes, when example needed to be made, they created assignments designed to humiliate. James was being sent to work under a British nurse named Catherine Hartley. That was all he knew. What he didn't know, what nobody bothered to tell him, was why every soldier who heard her name suddenly went quiet. Sister Catherine Hartley was a legend for all the wrong reasons. She had been one of the most respected surgical nurses in England before the war, known for fast hands and steady nerves. She could close a chest wound in minutes and rarely lost a patient. Doctors requested her specifically for difficult cases. Other nurses studied her technique. But 6 months ago, during a German bombing raid on the hospital, something inside her had broken in a way that couldn't be mended. She had been working in the operating theater when the lights went out. She saved 3 men that night, her hands moving with mechanical precision, even as the building shook around her. But the 4th one died while she held his hand. He was 19 years old, barely older than James himself. After that night, Catherine stopped speaking to most people. Nurses requested transfers. Doctors avoided her. And now the U.S. Army had decided to send James Mitchell to be her assistant, knowing full well what awaited him. James found her in the supply room, counting bandages with mechanical precision. She didn't look up when he entered. The room smelled of antiseptic and starched linen, and the silence stretched between them like a physical barrier. "Sister Hartley," he said quietly, keeping his voice respectful. "I'm Corporal Mitchell. I've been assigned to assist you." She continued counting. 10 seconds passed. 20. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the windows. Finally she spoke without turning around, her voice flat and cold as stone. "I didn't ask for help, especially not from you people." The words hit James like a slap. You people. He had heard those words his entire life in Mississippi, in training camps and 1,000 daily humiliations. But somehow hearing them in a British accent made them feel different, colder, more final. He took a breath, steadying himself, calling on a lifetime of practice at swallowing rage. "I don't want to be here either, ma'am, but these are my orders." Catherine finally turned to face him. Her eyes were gray, hard as stone, but underneath the hardness James saw something else. Pain, deep and unhealed. The kind of pain that turns people into ghosts. "Then I suppose we're both prisoners," she said, and turned back to her bandages. The first week was torture. Catherine gave James the worst jobs. Emptying bedpans, scrubbing blood from floors, carrying corpses to the morgue. She never thanked him, never acknowledged his presence unless absolutely necessary. Other nurses whispered when they saw them together. Some British staff were friendly to black soldiers, but Catherine treated James like he was invisible except when she was criticizing him. "You're too slow," she would say. "You're too loud. You're in my way." He had grown up in Mississippi, where survival meant knowing exactly how much rage you could swallow before it poisoned you. He knew how to make himself small, how to anticipate needs before they were spoken, how to exist in spaces that didn't want him. But late at night, alone in his quarters, the anger would surface. He had fought at Omaha Beach. He had pulled dying men from burning tanks. He had earned a Bronze Star for carrying a wounded captain 300 yards under machine gun fire. And now he was being treated like a servant by a woman who had never fired a shot. Then came the night that changed everything. It was 2 a.m. when the ambulances arrived, their bells cutting through the darkness. A bombing raid in London had produced dozens of casualties, more than the hospital could easily handle. The surgical ward became sudden chaos. Screaming patients, blood everywhere, not enough hands. James was helping to carry a stretcher when he heard Catherine's voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Mitchell, get over here now." He ran to her side. She was trying to hold down a soldier who was convulsing violently, blood pouring from a head wound that looked catastrophic. The man's eyes had rolled back, his body arching off the table. "Hold his shoulders," she commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos. James did. The soldier thrashed with incredible strength, driven by trauma and animal panic. "Press harder," Catherine shouted, already working, her hands moving with fierce concentration. James used all his weight, pinning the man's shoulders to the table. 3 minutes passed. 5 minutes. The soldier's convulsions began to slow as Catherine worked with surgical precision, her movements economical and exact. Finally, the soldier went still, unconscious but breathing. Catherine stepped back, blood covering her uniform. She looked at James properly for the first time, and he saw something shift in her expression. "You didn't panic," she said quietly. After that night, something changed. Catherine didn't become warm exactly, but she stopped treating James like he was worthless. She began giving him real medical tasks, trusting him with instruments, with procedures, with responsibility. "Hand me that scalpel." "No, the smaller one." "Good." She started explaining procedures as she worked, her voice losing some of its coldness. "You need to cut here, at this angle, to avoid the artery." James absorbed everything. He had always been good with his hands, had always been drawn to healing. Back home he had wanted to be a doctor, but that dream had died the day he saw the separate waiting rooms at the county hospital. White patients on one side, black patients on the other. Different entrances, different treatment, different worlds. No medical school would accept someone who looked like him, no matter how capable. But here in this British hospital, covered in other men's blood, James felt something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. And Catherine noticed. "You have steady hands," she said one evening as they sterilized instruments. "That's rare." It was the closest thing to a compliment he'd received from her. 6 weeks into the assignment, James finally asked the question that had been burning inside him. They were working late, the ward quiet except for the occasional moan from sleeping patients. "Sister Hartley," he said carefully, weighing each word, "why does everyone treat you like you're dangerous?" Catherine's hands stopped moving. For a long moment she said nothing, and James thought he'd overstepped. Then, without looking at him, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I killed a patient." James waited, understanding that silence was the only appropriate response. It was during the bombing. The lights went out. I was working in darkness, and I thought I had clamped the right artery. I'd done it 1,000 times before. Her voice remained flat, emotionless, but her hands were shaking. But in the dark I made a mistake. One small mistake. And he bled out while I was trying to save the man next to him. She paused, and James could hear her breathing, ragged and uneven. He was someone's son, someone's brother, 19 years old. And I killed him because I couldn't see in the dark. James put down the instrument he was holding. He stepped closer, something he would never have dared before, and spoke with quiet certainty. "You didn't kill him. The Germans did. The bombs did. The war did." Catherine finally looked at him, her gray eyes wet with tears she'd been holding back for months. "That's what everyone says. But I was the one holding the scalpel." James took another step closer, and in that moment the distance between them, the gulf of race and rank and expectation, seemed to narrow. "I held a man while he died in France. He said he was 18. He kept asking for his mother, and I couldn't give her to him. He died looking at my face, probably wishing it was hers instead. I think about him every single day. I see his face when I close my eyes." He paused, letting the truth settle between them. "But I didn't kill him. Neither of us are killers, Sister Hartley. We're just people trying to save lives in a world that keeps taking them." Catherine stared at him, and something in her face cracked open. And then she did something that shocked them both. She started crying, truly crying, not the controlled tears of a moment before, but deep, wrenching sobs. James stood there, uncertain, and then slowly, carefully, he put a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away. They stood like that in the dim light of the hospital, two wounded people finding recognition in each other's pain. After that night, everything changed. Catherine began talking to James, not just about work, but about everything. Her childhood in Yorkshire, her father who had been a country doctor, her brother who had died at Dunkirk. She asked James about Mississippi, about growing up black in the American South. And he told her things he had never told anyone, about the lynching he witnessed when he was 12, about the separate schools and water fountains, about the 1,000 daily humiliations that taught you exactly what you were worth. "I don't understand your country," Catherine said one evening as they organized supplies. "You're fighting for freedom in Europe while denying it at home." James laughed, but it was bitter. "Neither do we, Sister Hartley. Neither do we." She looked at him for a long moment, something like recognition in her eyes. "Stop calling me Sister Hartley," she said quietly. "My name is Catherine." Other staff began to notice the change. Catherine was smiling again, occasionally laughing, no longer snapping at people. And always Corporal Mitchell was nearby. The British nurses thought it was sweet. Some of them had black American boyfriends themselves. Bristol was full of such couples, despite American military disapproval. But the American soldiers stationed at the hospital noticed too, and they didn't think it was sweet at all, particularly a sergeant named Roy Davis from Georgia, who watched James and Catherine with growing anger. He cornered James one afternoon outside the mess hall, his voice low and dangerous. "I see you getting mighty friendly with that English nurse. That stops now, boy. You understand me?" James felt his jaw tighten, felt the old familiar rage rise up. "She's my supervisor. We work together." Davis stepped closer, close enough that James could smell the tobacco on his breath. "I don't care if she's the Queen of England. You don't talk to white women like she's your friend. You're making all of us look bad." That night, James couldn't sleep. Davis's words kept echoing. "You're making all of us look bad." It was the same burden he'd carried his whole life. Don't step out of line. Don't talk back. Don't look white people in the eye. Stay in your place. But what was his place? He had earned a Bronze Star at Normandy. He had saved lives. He was skilled, capable, valuable. And Catherine saw him as an equal, maybe even as a friend. Why should he apologize for that? But Davis was right about one thing. There would be consequences. The U.S. Army didn't look kindly on black soldiers who got too comfortable around white women. It didn't matter that Catherine was British. It didn't matter that they'd never touched, never even thought about romance. Just being seen together, just existing in the same space as equals, was dangerous. James knew he should create distance, start calling her Sister Hartley again, rebuild the walls. But he also knew with absolute certainty that he wouldn't. For the first time in his life, someone saw him as simply human. He wasn't giving that up. The first real incident happened on a Saturday evening. James and Catherine were walking back from the supply depot, both carrying boxes of bandages. Dusk was falling, the street nearly empty. 3 white American soldiers came around the corner, already drunk, their laughter loud and aggressive. One of them was Sergeant Davis. He stopped dead when he saw them, his expression shifting from surprise to anger to something uglier. "Well, well," Davis said, his words slurred. "If it isn't Corporal Mitchell and his little English friend." Catherine stiffened but kept walking, her face set in determined neutrality. James tried to steer them past the men, knowing that engagement would only make things worse. But Davis stepped into their path, blocking the sidewalk. "You teaching him some manners, man? Because his kind certainly needs it." Catherine's voice was ice when she spoke. "Get out of our way, Sergeant." Davis laughed, and his companions joined in. "Hear that, boys? She's defending him, like he's a real soldier or something." One of the other soldiers grabbed Catherine's arm, not hard but possessively, mockingly. That was when James dropped his box and stepped forward. The soldier released Catherine's arm immediately when James moved, because even drunk they could see the look in his eyes. James had killed men in combat. He had survived Omaha Beach, had walked through machine gun fire, had seen things that hollowed you out inside. 3 drunk soldiers didn't scare him. What scared him was what would happen after, the machinery of military justice that would crush him for defending a white woman. "Touch her again," James said quietly, his voice carrying more threat than any shout, "and see what happens." Davis pulled himself up, trying to look tough, trying to reassert dominance. "You threatening me, boy?" Before James could respond, a British military policeman appeared from around the corner, drawn by the commotion. "What's going on here?" he demanded. The drunk soldiers scattered immediately, knowing they were in the wrong, knowing they couldn't explain this. The British MP looked at James and Catherine with understanding eyes, with something like sympathy. "You too, all right?" Catherine nodded, her hands shaking now that the danger had passed. "We're fine. Thank you." After the MP left, Catherine turned to James in the gathering darkness. "That was incredibly stupid. They could have you court-martialed for threatening a superior officer." James picked up his box of bandages, his hands steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through him. "They weren't going to let us walk away, Catherine. I chose the lesser evil." And in saying her name and making that choice, James had crossed a line from which there was no return. They both knew it, and neither of them, in that moment, regretted it. They had found something rare in the midst of war: recognition, dignity, the simple human connection of being seen. Whatever consequences followed would be worth it. But the consequences, when they came, would be more severe than either of them imagined.